And the next thing on the agenda is the budget timeline. And I'm going to hand this over to Director Frederickson. And before we start the discussion, I need a motion and a second on this.
So made.
By Director Velazquez, and a second?
Second.
By Director Bullion. Okay. So, Director Frederickson?
Thank you, Chair Franz. Directors, this is a draft version of our 24-25 budget planning. Again, for this year, we're going to move up the timeline to get everything approved in order to be able to hire staff before other districts sign contracts with them. We have looked at some of the other districts, and there are a tremendous amount of vacant positions out there. So we want to make sure that we're posting positions and signing contracts as soon as possible. So again, we're moving up the timeline. This timeline is very similar to this past year. And again, there'll be changes that can make as we move along the process. But for now, this is the proposed timeline for the planning.
Okay, is there any, please, any questions? Director Burnick?
Is there potentially a typo in there of January 13th, 2024 at the bottom of the first page? Because I'm assuming that July 8th, 2024, that starts at the top. and
Oh,
then
that should be 2025.
Okay, thank you, because I thought I was reading it backwards for a minute, and so
Thank you.
I just was.
And then I just have a question about the Finance Advisory Committee meetings. I mean, some of the feedback I heard from the members who dropped off the committee is that they didn't feel that there was any, they weren't allowed to give any real input, and to have an impact to advise the board on the finances in our district. And I see that the advisory meetings come after the board meetings. So just wondering if that's something that you might want to consider,
Yeah,
or
we
maybe
are-
you've talked about or whatever.
We actually have a survey that we've sent out to the current members to see what days are best for them, whether we'll continue to meet right away in the mornings. Part of our challenge is we don't want to have things going to the Finance Advisory Committee that you as a board aren't aware of. So part of that is strategic, that we make sure that you're aware of issues that are arising, and then we'll have conversations with the Finance Committee to make recommendations or to adjust any kind of either guidelines or practices or whatever we need to. But we will certainly have that conversation when we meet again for the first time this year.
Thank you.
And I do serve on that committee, and in my experience, there's ample opportunity for feedback, and also always more informal feedback as well, that Director Frederickson is always willing to, use her time to help.
I
So
didn't disagree with
there
that.
might
It was
be-
a timing of issue, of when it was,
Yeah.
done. It was more of a timing issue.
Like time of the day?
I've attended those meetings as well.
No, that it's after the board meeting, but I think in terms of responsibility to the board, and fiduciary to the board's gonna see stuff before the finance
Right.
committee does.
No, it makes
and-
sense. An advisory committee is to advise the board, so perhaps they come after a study session and before a board meeting, because that's the sequence of how we typically see things, is through a study session, then a board session. But I'm glad that you're got the survey and you're addressing that, so thank you.
Okay, so are there any other questions on the budget schedule? It is fairly similar to last year's laid out, and I trust that Director Frederickson will lay out the financial advisory team meeting schedule the same way as last year, so that there is a good representation as well as feedback on timing. So are we ready for a vote? Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, that passes 7-0. The next one on the agenda is to set the levy meeting date, and I believe this is the truth and taxation that we do every year. Okay. I will need a motion and a second on this
So made.
by Director Burnick.
Second.
And second by Director Velazquez. Pardon me?
Olsted.
Olsted, oh, sorry.
I'm good at throwing my voice, but not that good.
All right. Okay, so I'm going to hand this over to Director Frederickson and to just remind us and discuss what happens during the truth and taxation.
So we, as you recall, are required to approve our levy by December 31st, and you're required to have a truth and taxation hearing to the public before that. So just as a matter of timing, we need to have that meeting on December 9th so that the board can approve that levy prior to the deadline. So we have to submit all of the work to the Department of Education. We have to get the proposals to the county to get onto the property tax proposals. So there's a whole sequence of events. So we typically always just do the truth and taxation hearing that first board meeting in December in order to meet all the other timelines.
Any questions? Okay, all in favor for the truth and taxation meeting on December 9th?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? That passes 7-0. Okay, so on to policy. We have one policy on tonight's agenda, and that is policy 525.1, the student use of personal electronic devices. This is the final reading of this policy. We did discuss it on July 9th. And I am going to take a motion in a second on this. First,
So made.
by Director Velazquez, and a second.
Second.
Second by Director Burnick. Okay, and I'm handing this over to Dr.
I'll take this
Oh,
one.
you'll take this one?
Yeah,
Okay.
thanks. Thank you, Chair France, members of the board. Tonight, what you see here is a result in our conversations with the policy committee, which essentially now what you see is the 525.1 aligned to the MSBA model policy as well, since we initially had some conversation with you all. And we've broadened this out to electronic devices. We know phones are the biggest culprit, but it could be some other personal electronics, and so we just kept it generic so we could have some latitude as technology changes. In that, as you all know, the statute now requires that the board or every district must have a policy on file, and this policy from MSBA directs the superintendent and administration to establish the rules and procedures. So, based upon different learning environments, levels, et cetera, they'll have that procedural aspect addressed at the school campus level. And additional conversations of some of the Minnesota statutes that were cross-referenced that we did not have in our initial draft with you all. That's been included as well. We had a lot of conversation at the policy committee about procedure, and just want to be clear with the board. It was really good context for them, similar to some of the conversation that we had several weeks ago, that this conversation, or this policy is one that we know from an E8 standpoint is something that we have been working towards. I would say namely middle school, because there's not a lot of cell phone issues at the elementary level. But we really took the time to get buy-in at the middle school level where we were having some significant challenges, and really have strong support with the staff in that building. So some of the changes that we made for this coming year procedurally will look very different than what we had last year. Because of the success that we had at the middle school in terms of how we move forward with that process and built buy-in along the way, both with students, families, and staff, that's something I know that Dr. Bezic and his team are engaged in at the high school, but changing the practices, or I should say emphasizing the practices in the classrooms, without having access to personal electronics. But similar to what we did last year at the middle school, I know the conversations that they're having are in that passing and lunchtime as we develop the same process that was successful at the middle school that we would replicate at the high school to move towards the ultimate goal of where we're at a holistic away for the day. There's been a lot of conversations that Dr. Bezic and I have had, along with his administrative team, on the setup for a successful implementation of said policy, and so procedurally how they would manage that in a sea of nearly 3,000 kids, and without having that grassroots buy-in that we took at the middle school level. Something that Dr. Edwards and I were pretty impressed with, and sorry, I'm just kind of giving you some more context that we had from that committee conversation too, at the middle school level, was around what does that phase out look like? And we had a core group of teachers who led a lot of this conversation at the middle school level to go complete away for the day. And we went into the conversation, I'll speak for myself, but I went into the conversation thinking a different plan and left that conversation heavily influenced by what I was hearing in terms of that staff's ability to organize and mobilize all of the research that their action research that they had engaged with, to come forth with strong recommendations of protocols, procedures, et cetera, for the middle school level. And the last meeting that Dr. Edwards and I had with the leadership team, the teacher leadership team and administration there, was a survey that was conducted for staff to support a complete away for the day. And I don't think I've ever in my career seen the solidarity of staff around an issue such as this. And I think there was about 92, 93% buy-in and support. And I would say the outliers were supportive, but they had questions that needed to be addressed in terms of what's the practicality, what are some of the procedural things and that kind of a thing. But very confident in how we're going to be able to move forward. But I really trust the process that we engaged in. And yeah, there was some pushback, but that's something that everybody knew we were building toward. And I'm very confident that's going to be highly successful. I'm not a fan of rushing into failure and setting up administrative teams, teacher leadership teams, to doing something that's going to be impossible on the front side, and then we are spending all of our time managing how to perfect something. And so through some conversation at the high school, that is something that I think Dr. Edwards and I are both supportive of, so that we can work through the high school leadership team, very similar to what we did at the middle school for that kind of successful launch, to enact a holistic approach to the procedural aspects that administration will develop around this policy. So I wanted to share all that with you all because I think we are going to see some significant changes in many of our campuses, and working towards a holistic approach, E12, throughout this year and for sure for next year. So just want to share that context of the policy conversation from the policy committee, and the expectations that I have with our high school team to engage in the same aspect that we did at the middle school team for success, long-term success. So with that, Chair, I turn it back to you.
Okay, I'm going to open it up to the board to ask questions.
Admittedly, I'm a little confused. When I opened this to read last week, I'm like, whoa, this completely changed from the last time we saw it. And I knew that the policy committee was meeting and things like this. I admit my first thought was this doesn't go far enough. And I understand that the MSBA policy. We're modeling it after that, and this is new. Theirs is new as well. So I keep going back and forth on some things. So a point of clarity. So you're saying, because like the away for the day language is completely omitted from this.
It's in the procedural side.
It's on the procedural side.
Processes based upon how policy is implemented may change based upon what we observe in the schools. And versus going back to the board to change policy, to change practice, this is why we try to separate policy and procedures. And so the first time you all saw that, admittedly, we had a lot of the procedure language built into the policy. And I think my very first year here, we were working on separating those two on a lot of our policies. So that is a marked visual change that you saw. And also, we now have the model MSBA policy. So that was also where we just deferred to that and then moved a lot of the procedural language out that we had, and that's carried over now into this will be now the student handbook in admin language at the building level.
And just as a point of clarification, because we did go through this on July 8th.
Yeah.
They did not have the MSBA model
Right.
policy at that time.
Correct.
Right.
So even though we were looking at one, they were reading off of the model policy that didn't get a chance to get in there.
Correct.
And we continued the conversation as if we were reading the MSBA policy, which is this one. So I don't mean to, I just want to clarify that
No.
for the
Yeah,
listening
that is a
public.
marked
that- yeah.
change
Sure.
that didn't, and again, we also, well, we didn't have that then, but we also didn't have a chance to engage with the policy committee, which we knew timing-wise,
Right.
we wouldn't be able to do that until last week or 2 weeks ago, or last week.
So when it comes to procedural, because yes, I understand that, and I think even the MSBA policy, which, right, we didn't see yet hardly on July 9th, and, you know, now it's posted, and that's even pretty skeletal in terms of, basically, because it's new, I imagine, because this is new, it's up to what your district wants to do, kind of is generally speaking what that policy says. So I don't think guidance is necessarily very strong there. But, so from a procedural level, so is it by primary and secondary, or is it by
Elementary,
school?
elementary and middle school and high school having consistent practices based upon their level. And so elementary and middle school will have very similar processes. Elementary, and I'm generalizing here, and this is something that we talked about, you know, at the policy committee with Katie being there as well, that we know that there's not a huge issue with cell phones or personal technology at the elementary level.
Sure.
Definitely, we had issues at the middle school level. Had a lot of informed conversation of practice and procedure from them on that. And then Dr. Bezick and team will be similar to where the middle school was last year as they work towards the full implementation from a procedural standpoint to align, you know, as an entire district. There were just a lot of concerns of the magnitude of administration to be able to effectively have a procedure in place starting this fall that they could actively monitor 100% to fidelity versus having lots of gaps in their procedures. So that was the concern that was expressed. And so again, we heard some of that even last year with the middle schools, and we didn't have consistent practice. That became a real point of contention among teachers because they didn't align in their practices. And it took them the year to kind of test it and get calibration around that practice. And so by year's end, had a very different experience with staff. And that was also reflected in that whole school staff survey that I mentioned too. So that is a conversation that I've had with Dr. Bezick, and he is also having with his administrative team in terms of what does this look like as we cascade this into full implementation from a procedural standpoint at the high school with immediate changes to consistently have classroom practices, to not allow personal technology, but the passing and lunch hour still being a space where we are building the buy-in and kind of co-design of the decision of what that plan and procedures will look like, similar to what we did at the middle school. That's what Dr. Bezic and his team are strongly desiring to happen at the high school as well, so that they can be successful when in that full implementation of significantly different procedures.
Just a
And
point.
Dr. Bezic, I don't know if I left anything out, does that pretty much capture the conversation you've been having? It does, do you want me to pop up? Sure, sure.
And while Dr. Bezic is coming forward, I just want to emphasize a point at the E8 level, because the issue at the E5 level is
Different too.
Personal watches more than it is cell phones. So the intention there is that will get addressed E8, E5 specifically with regard to that. So their procedures in their handbook will speak to that.
So we were watching the conversation, obviously, the middle school's having the conversation, we're hearing that this K piece was going on. I can, you've all, or a number of you had kids at the high school. Obviously, we're not perfect, we're not different than any other, I'm not gonna hold us up as an exemplar or any, looser than any other high school in the state. So as we're watching that, I'm like, okay, we've already had and I haven't had a groundswell of teachers. I haven't had a built meeting about, and cell phones really haven't come up at the high school. It hasn't been a priority one issue. So we're watching this, but we have had some teachers start using the pockets or saying, hey, away during class time. And when Dr. Thomas said, hey, this is going on, the board's talking about it, I said, well, we're already trying to look at starting to restrict them during the classroom time. And then about a month ago, he goes, hey, the board took a swing, or he just said, one of the leanings was that you're gonna be the same K8 as the K8, and I'm like, whoa, we haven't had this conversation, and we were already looking at beefing up, saying, hey, let's not have them at all during classroom time. So I'd love for an opportunity to do that and see how that works and monitor and have conversations with staff, because we haven't had anything. And I'm sorry, I really don't want to be the first high school that I'm aware of in the state of Minnesota that says there's no high school, there's no cell phones at all, from morning to night. I don't know of any. Just saying,
Dr. Bezic?
I want things to go well. I'm a true believer in kids and adults will follow rules that are reasonable and well implemented. There'll be they don't follow rules that feel like they were just not implemented well or thrust upon them, and that's where I feel like we would be. So I'd like the opportunity to gain support and work with my students, because I think I can easily sell and get them on board that, hey, during class time, we're not using these things. These are away, and then we'll see how that works, and do we need to go further, as the year goes on into next year. So that's what I'd like the opportunity to do.
Yeah, Dr. Bezic, as being on the MSBA, just so you're aware, it's been a topic of conversation for quite some time.
Yep, I
There
follow
are
those
other-
meetings.
There are other high schools, so hopefully we're learning from them.
I'd love to know one in the metro that is doing this, because I haven't heard that. And I'm pretty dialed in. I've been a high school principal for 25 years. Used to sit on the high school, the board and all of that. So I'm a little aware as well. So I hear these things. I hear that Minnetonka is doing this or other schools are doing this. So I pick up and I call those places. And I say, and they're like, yeah, no. So we're not that different than the other schools in the metro and around the state.
Can I ask just one
Yeah.
thing before we continue on with the questions? Because I'm sure there's going to be a lot of questions. And I want the board to remember that policy and procedure are separate. We have been moving that direction, so we're not supposed to get into the nitty-gritty weeds within the policies. But for the benefit of all, because I did get some questions beforehand from the majority of board members, could someone just clarify what the policy is? Basically going to be K through 8 and then high school, just lay it on the line kind of, because we're kind of jumping around quite a bit. And I think that'll help.
So,
Procedures, yeah, the procedure that has been decided on, just to lay it,
So
because
that- to
I'm
be-
confused.
yeah.
Michelle, I think we're waiting for this meeting
Yeah,
to
Chair, if
finalize
if
it.
I may, the E through 8 procedures that administration is aligning towards is that we would have a full away for the day. So as you come into the school, you can be on your personal technology, but once that first bell of instruction rings, the technology is put away into your backpack or into your locker or et cetera. Some teachers may have storage bins or whatever, so, but it's away for the day. And then at the end of the day of that bell of instruction, you go into activities, you're calling parents for pickup, et cetera, that would be permissible. The high school, Dr. Bezek and his team are wanting to take the approach that we did at the middle school last year, where it was completely away during instructional time of our core class instruction, and that during passing time and at lunch, students at the middle school were able to utilize their cell phone as they were phasing into a complete away for the day for this year. So they took the year to transition to this, to have the conversation with their students, with their families, get the buy-in and support of the teachers, kind of understand how they want to have their rules and regs and procedures aligned, particularly some of the disciplinary actions, first, second, and third offense, et cetera. So that is what Dr. Bezek and his team are requesting for the procedural side of things for this year, to mirror what we did at the middle school as a successful process to getting the campus there. And that may come for this year. It could be something that for sure will come for next year, but that's the conversation he's requested of me to consider as we were working through the implementation.
Thank you. I just know that we were kind of bouncing around a little bit, and I
Yep.
didn't want to usurp the board questions, but at the same time.
Sure.
I mean,
Context.
we needed a baseline. Okay.
That is the baseline.
Yeah, and I would just say, we received, through AMSD, there was a link to the cell phone toolkit, which was developed in July of 2024, put out to the Minnesota Association of Secondary School Principals. And it basically, have you seen this document?
I have.
Yeah, I mean, no cell phone allowed during the academic day for elementary, middle school, and high school. And so I think while, this is being talked about at districts right now, and I think that,
Yeah, and I would
I
say.
think the time is now, I mean.
Yeah, and
to
Director
be having it.
Atkinson-
And they're pretty
Yeah.
clear in here
Yeah,
that
that's
there's,
that was,
I
would-
was super impressed with
Yeah,
this
I would
document.
liken that document, and I think we discussed this at that Monday meeting too, that was shared at one, maybe it was a session that I was at. But the document that Director Atkinson is referring to, I would liken or call it the model procedures. So MSBA has the model policy. I would say that would be MESPA's, or
Yeah.
MASSP's model procedures.
Yes.
But it's
I-
K through
I-
12 is what
Right,
it is.
MESPA and math, yeah,
And
that's
they
the key.
lay out a few scenarios.
Mm-hmm.
It's very thorough and well done, and the communication and template is there. It does say, outlining a variety of strategies and options for school districts to consider as they develop their policies.
Yeah.
So I agree that it's procedural.
Yeah.
And we lean on it in terms of our policy development. I think just to kind of say kind of give a guidepost of where I'm at with this is, to me, what's in our model policy that's on the table tonight and what administration is bringing forward as what would then happen for this next year, to me, that's, in my view, maybe not everyone's, but in my view here, the minimum. Like, that's the absolute minimum. And while I understand the administrative challenges, and we don't want to rush to failure, but we don't want to delay success for our kids. And I understand that we're in August, and I understand that doing something at the high school level seems like next to impossible. There's also a piece of me that believes that if you just say, this is it, bell to bell.
And hey, you're a parent, you could tell your kid not to bring their phone to school. How well is that working?
No, I, with all due respect, completely respect that. And the feedback from kids who have been through this transition is it works well if everybody is in the same boat.
Right, exactly.
So
Yep. And there's
I don't, but
enforcement.
I respect and can feel your concern with implementing something without,
We haven't had any conversation.
Feeling
about it. You're-
confident
You're throwing it
behind
at
it.
us, yeah. That's how I feel. I feel
And-
very,
and I
feel very
know-
unsupported by it. I feel blindsided. That's how
and
I
I
feel.
know that, it is very truly what's best for kids, and I think you know that too.
I think there's a way to get to what is best for kids. I don't know,
Yeah.
one size fits all. Maybe we should have free lunches for kids at K-12 then. We do
Yeah.
things differently, K-8 and different things at the high school, so.
Yeah.
I think success can look different. I think give us an opportunity. But you're not giving us an opportunity to even weigh in and have a say in it. That's what frustrates me. So I don't know where we lost the trust of you, but that's how I feel if we go this route.
I want to go back to something that Director Bullion said at our last meeting and how confusing it is to families when you have different policies and procedures at different levels. And I think one thing is that we've been preparing our middle school kids for this and they're ready. Now as they transition into the high school, now we're back to, different policies and procedures. And so I understand the challenge that
But we
this
do
creates.
give them more rights and responsibilities as they get older as well. We do scale up our opportunities for them to handle situations. You're right, we have tougher policies and procedures or more oversight at kindergarten and then a little less at middle school and a little less at high school. At least has been my experience because we're trying to teach them to be adults.
Yeah, and I would also say, a parent said to me in the last month is that at the high school, you have the most amount of cell phone use, you have the hardest classes, and even though my student may not be on their cell phone, if my student doesn't use their cell phone during class, they're distracted by another student using it in class. And you also have the biggest and largest amount of mental health issues in our high school as well. So to me, this becomes even more important at the high school than it does even in elementary level where you don't have as many cell phones. I mean, clearly I support what we're doing at elementary level, but I would love to see a bell-to-bell. I mean, I just think that's where my mind is at, and yeah.
So, first of all, with this policy, what it really is doing is delegating the responsibility to administration at the different levels to be able to implement it at those levels in a way that they think is going to work best for the culture of the school. I will say that to be blindsided by this, I mean, like I said at the last meeting, I've had experience in completely public and private, completely cell-phone free schools through 12th grade. And again, I will reemphasize what Director Crosby said, is when they're all in it together, really, maybe the first couple of weeks are hard, but after that, it becomes more standard because obviously the ones that are using are standing out. Now, there's always exceptions to the rule that do have to be delegated locally. Sure. Because the local administration knows it best. My concern is that in my experience walking through our high school, that we've put the burden of that enforcement on individual teachers in the classroom. And that takes away from their teaching also. And having a more consistent, right off the bat, to say, we're not doing that to your teachers are all going to be in this together too, is what, even if, and again, you know your school the best when you're phasing it in. I'd like to personally, and I'm not a teacher, I take that, I am not a high school teacher, but if I was one, and if I could potentially even take an iota of what I think it's like, I wouldn't want that responsibility on me individually either. So and I don't know where you stand on that or what is actually going to happen or what you have discussed. I will say it's, this has been an ongoing discussion over the years, so I would hope that the ideas that are coming to the table are those that people have already been at least ruminating on in preparation for this.
So, Board, I appreciate the feedback, and this is the conversation that we had, several weeks ago as well. And I do know that there's been a lot of conversation, middle school, high schools, about implementing this policy. And there was concern, I know, from Principal Kabushek initially, and I know went to MASSP Institute this summer and talked with middle school colleagues and who have lived through that and our understanding of how beneficial that can be. And so there is that initial shock. That's going to be real at any of our campuses, high school, middle school, or elementary, with the level of dependency that I think that's developed over the years with some of our students in personal technology. One of the things that I can empathize with Dr. Bezic and his team is, and I've been out there many times, as you all have, and I'm just picturing the cafeteria at any of our given lunches. And they do a great job of managing, the students and keeping them, on point. And of the, 15 staff that you might have down there, I could be short on how many, but of the many staff that are typically standing on the perimeter, walking in, in and out.
About 7 or 8,
Okay, there's going to be I was being generous then. So, but even with 15, I would probably still say this. Of the hundreds of students that are in that cafeteria, from the learning stairs down to the lines, I'm assuming you could assure Dr. Bezic someone's not going to adhere to your process. Is that a fair statement to say?
Sure. Well, we lived it before. I remember when we had, we started off, cell phones were first out. They were, Prohibition has a great track record.
So, and that's the concern that I'm trying to make sure that we are able to successfully address and have the buy-in of support at the local level, the staff level, all getting behind this like we've had. And that's the one element that I can't speak to tonight. I can't guarantee that assurance. And even with that assurance, is something going to happen at the middle school where a kid's going to not follow the procedures? Yeah, it's going to happen. I get that. Nothing's going to be a perfect system. I'm just wanting to embrace success as much as we possibly can from the launch or from the decision, and not feel like I've just set staff up. And that's where I'm trying to understand and work through that. Very similar to the middle school conversations that we had with his team, with Principal Kabushek's team. Team was halfway down this way. Many others were, I'm not too sure. But until we all aligned, I know this fall, Dr. Edwards just spoke with some of those teacher leaders at the Prior Lake Days. Ran into a couple of them, and they're ready to go and excited for it, and they understand the process that it took to get there. And that was another thing that was reiterated. I'll speak for myself. I appreciated their process. I appreciated hearing directly from our teacher leaders, who are the voices of the hundreds of staff in that building, to be able to get behind a decision that, Director Crosby, to your point, that is all about success for kids. That was driving it, and they pushed me as their superintendent, and I heard enough to say, yeah, okay, you sold me, I get it, I know where you're at. That's what I'm looking for with the high school. It is I think, Director Atkinson, you have a fair point around classes, moving from the middle school to the high school. But they've not, there's not a class yet that's experienced a complete away for the day. This will be the inaugural 8th grade class that will experience it. So I don't have to contend with your freshmen being used to a very different practice of a complete away for the day. They do know the away during instruction practice, so that's aligned. That would be aligned. So I don't have that fear, but I hear your point. Consistency, and several of you have brought that forward too. And I don't disagree. I just want to make sure if that's the direction that we go, that the high school is poised to be as successful as possible, knowing there will be breaches and they will find ways to do something. That's what young people do.
Give me your orders, I'll do
But,
whatever you want us to do.
So, so that's just the context I wanted to share, going back to our original conversation here with the policy. And, Chair, I turn it back to you to see if there's anything further that, the board would like to see. And we would certainly yield to that. Otherwise, what I shared in terms of the process was the plan. So I turn it back to you.
Okay, well, first of all, I do want to remind that we are separating policy from procedure, even though we are mixing them, and I certainly mixed them because we're trying to understand the outcome of this. But I want to know if you are, and I want to emphasize also, we have to get something in place before the first of the year, which is coming up. So how does the board feel about voting on this tonight and the policy the way it stands right now? Anyone want to give their feedback? And then I'll take it to a vote, because if we're going to do something different, or if you're okay with this, then I'd suggest we just move forward. And I'm not going to speak for anyone individually.
I'll give some feedback just based on serving on the policy committee. We went through this in depth, and we talked about, this being, separating the procedures from the policy so that the procedures can be prescribed by the, perspective levels. I think when in conversations that we've had, my thought is what best serves the students. And I'm hearing the concerns that you've shared, Dr. Bezic. I appreciate you coming up and talking, and, giving us your thoughts and your feelings regarding this. I think that we have to look at what's best for the students, and you shared that success can come in many different ways. I think the will of the board has been that we have a policy that's K through 8, and how that is infiltrated. We do want to give we do want to give you space to have success in implementing it. And I think if I were to have a thought based on the conversation had here at the table tonight, would be we have to have the buy-in of the whole team, from board down. And I understand that your position as leading that school, you see a lot of things that we don't see. You can foresee challenges in having the students, sneaking it at lunch or whatever it may be. But I think the thing is that, like what Director Atkinson said, the support has to be for the teachers. And you shared that you weren't feeling supported by this or blindsided. And although I hear that, and that I don't want you to feel that way. I think the support really is for the teachers.
And a policy for them not to have to create their own rules. Like some teachers in the high school have had their rules from, for years, and they have no problem with it. The students know that's how the students know that's how their classroom operates, and the students don't buck at it. I think it's really important for your buy-in. And I think as a board member, I want to say, speaking for myself, that I appreciate the concerns, and also, having, I think my place is giving the teachers the support that they need, and understanding that there's going to be grace. I understand how do we implement this? I think that if we do it as a whole, I think that we will be pleasantly surprised by the success, and also having grace through the process. So I don't know if that's what was asked, but that's the context that I have to offer.
My question was, the policy 525.1, we are starting a new school year, so we need to get something in place.
I think the policy
Okay.
is, we went through it at policy committee. I know that it has changed since the last meeting. I feel that this policy is ready to be voted on, but I'm just one.
And does anybody else want to make a
Yeah,
comment?
I would just say, I agree with Director Olsted. I was very confused by this, which is why I sent the email to Director Herman today as well. I feel like the policy as written is actually less, like as a parent reading this policy, it feels like it has less restrictions in it than it did before. And perhaps what we need is, I'm looking at the MSBA policy, which is really truly just a tiny little bit of language, which we incorporated into point A. But they do say that the procedures will be an addendum to this policy. So I think what that would be helpful from a parent standpoint is that if we could add the procedures as an addendum to this policy, because that links back to that student handbook that we just approved, and it would give, like Director Brilliant said, the teachers are the ones who, they need something to go to, and something that they all can follow consistently, and as well as the parents, so that we can enforce it as well and work in partnership with the school to know that, no, they should not have their cell phones out during the day.
Director Edwards, I have a question with regards to that, if you could address Director Atkinson, because I assume that the E through 8, the elementary and the middle school, is going to communicate this. We have this policy, the policy links, but there will be actual more prescriptive communication.
Yes, in the actual policy, that's what is, that at the bottom of the policy where it says violations of this policy and associated rules and procedures, that's what it's referring to. And here again, the elementary and the middle school are well prepared to clearly articulate this at the outset to their students and families to kick off the school year, and have multiple steps in place that Mr. Kabushek at the middle school level has worked through with his leadership team, communications out to parents. We actually started that process, as you recall, back in June with a message that Dr. Thomas sent out to our families. So we have been communicating that in advance to date, and we'll continue to do so, and that's what that specific line is intended to call out there, is that associated rules and procedures will be put in place. I think the difference being, if I may attempt to summarize, the difference being we haven't yet communicated and we do not yet have plans in place for that level of communication and inclusion in the handbooks, except for the during instructional time at the high school level.
So can I ask why the language that's in here was scratched out, basically, or I don't know what the exact word is, but, because it says students shall not use any personal electronic device that in any way disrupts or distracts from the educational environment, and that was even taken out of the policy. And that was even in our original policy. So that's why, when I read it, I felt like it was less enforcing of a cell phone policy than even our original policy was. And then there's other points, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, so Dr. Thomas
Yeah.
answered that earlier of separating out procedure from policy. So this allows more latitude for.
Yeah, no, I'm clear on that.
Administration to be able to exercise latitude into what they specifically need.
Dr. Olsted?
Can I ask another clarifying question of our speaker?
Yes, you may.
Mr. Bezick, is the frustration, because I gotta tell you, my heart stopped a little, when you said you didn't feel supported, so I wanna dig into that. So is the frustration that you're feeling the fact that, I mean, we have to have this policy, legislation
I get
dictates
the
that,
policy.
right?
And I get that I'm sorry, do you want me to dialogue or do you want me to listen?
Well, my question
Yep.
for you is your point of frustration is, I think, like what you said, Dr. Edwards, about the level of procedure writing that goes with this policy. You don't feel like you'd be ready yet for like the first day of school. And is that where you feel like I'm not given time?
It wasn't even on our radar.
said that.
It wasn't on our radar to have a ban at the high school. I remembered the conversations of the K-8. I remember middle schools having conversations because teachers came forward. I haven't had anybody come forward of our staff at our built meetings. We haven't had those conversations that we should be banning cell phones or that would even, when the piece went out after the last board meeting, they're like, is this gonna happen at the high? They were just like, where's this coming from at the high school? So I think the frustration is we were looking at, okay, how could we dial things back in the classroom? And when Dr. Thomas mentioned this, I said, okay, we were looking at, I want to bring to my staff, because we haven't had not one conversation about going this route. Again, it was all K-8. So I believe that there's a route to get to what we want. You're right, if you're asking my personal opinion, I don't know that bans are ever good. I think having them away during the instructional time is the route to go, because we have kids that come and go. I have kids going PSEO, I have kids driving to MinCaps, I have all these different factors that will be there. So I don't want to chase kids for doing this, which is what we did when we first started loosening up the cell phone piece, but it got probably into the classroom too much. We've also started moving all of our passes and IDs are on electronic and using your devices and all that. So it's a total switch. I'm like going, oh God, what am I gonna do about student IDs? What am I gonna do about passes? We were trying to do, these things. And I'm a very well-connected principal in the metro area and across the state. None of my colleagues are telling me that they're banning wire-to-wire phones at the high school. It's just not anywhere in the realm that I'm in. And I was on the MASSP board. I was on the policy committee in the past and been in all those meetings. I track, I do get involved in these things. So, yeah, I'm a little surprised. And so when you say to me, I think we need to do this K-8, that's why I feel like, okay.
Well,
That's where I feel like, wow, where did this come out of left field? I know how my AP is, because we were talking about it. They're like, there's no way they're gonna do that all the way through 12th grade this fall. And I'm sitting here going, oh my God, I'm gonna have to tell them tomorrow that we're doing this, and we'll do it. I mean, we can make anything happen. Our kids are pretty compliant and they do listen to us, but I'll lose some respect and support from them, because I think there's a happy medium. There are different levels. It isn't all K-12. Like I said, I throw that out there a little bit back in your faces a little bit about the lunch program and not having free lunches at the high school and things like that. We do things differently K-8 and at the high school, whether anybody asks us or not. So I don't feel like I was included in the conversation. I haven't had conversations with my staff. So you're talking some of the biggest culture issues. So I can engage in the culture wars at Prior Lake High School. I can do it with our kids. I can make Prior Lake great again if that's what you guys want. Hey, I can do it.
Well, we are great. So I think, and I will say, at the last meeting, it was me who said, do we want to consider E through 12? Because it was a consistency thing. That was my thing. And then at the same meeting, it was brought up, Well, the high school kids are a lot more mobile, like to your point, like what you just said. You've got them driving different places, you've got them going different places. And that was something, my lived experience, I'm not there yet. I don't have kids there yet, so that's not something I thought of. And I'm like, good point. So yeah, even in that same meeting, my mind shifted a little bit, because it's just like, yeah, different ages of kids, they're mobile, they're driving, they're leaving school to go to MinCaps, they're doing all of these different things. So I got that. So it was me that said E through 12 for consistency's sake. Now, looking at this policy where it's a policy, procedures are separate, and you can take those procedures or whatever you create at the high school, because to your point, it is different when you're talking about a fourth grader with maybe a cell phone versus a junior. So, and I get that, there's differences. So I appreciate that, and I will say it was me that brought up a consistency issue last time. And I know in our communication.
You look like you don't look like you're alone on an island, so I can read the room.
No, we had board
Well, I
alignment on
mean,
that
I
decision.
think I have to be fair about that.
Can I bring this back to the question that I asked, please? So we've got 525.1 that is policy. It does delegate back. We do know that it's been worked out a little bit more at E through 8. If, and granted, what we're hearing is that the high school doesn't have this worked out yet as far as the nuances. But my question to the board is, are we okay with voting on this policy that does delegate that back to the schools to navigate these procedures and develop them over time? So, because I want to bring this back to exactly what this policy says, which is, and by the way, we do have to have something in place because the school year is starting.
Yeah.
So, and
think
we do have a
I'm-
legislative
go ahead.
issue,
I'm
so,
okay voting on the
Okay,
policy as it
good.
is. I think it was really clear after our July 8th meeting. Everyone sat here and we really all emphasized our strong desire to at least consider high school, look at what that could be. At a minimum, I don't want to speak for the rest of you, I would love the challenge of like getting some stronger procedures in the classroom to support our teachers. And if it takes time at the high school for that to get tightened up and get the buy-in, but I think consistently, I heard everyone saying, like, what would that look like if we could get it up to 12?
and
So
to
I'm
be
happy
fair,
to
our
vote on
direction is to
policy.
you, Dr. Thomas,
And
not,
procedures, you
we
know,
do
are
not
Yeah,
direct.
so I was, if I may, Chair, in board, thank you for your perspectives and feedback and the clarity, Dr. Bezick. I appreciate your perspective tonight as well, and on behalf of your team and sharing some of the conversations that we've been having. And you now can sense the challenge that we're negotiating here. A commitment to do what's right for kids in a way that's supportive and successful. That's the challenge before us. And I guess I don't want to keep spinning. And so if I may request of the board, we have the policy that directs the superintendent, me, to work with schools to establish procedures and protocols. That's the first, that's the vote. I guess my ask of the board is to gauge a more formal mark of your will, of what you desire from a procedure standpoint, to know where we are going to go, and where your desire lies. And I guess we have a commitment to doing it, and I just need to hear unilaterally, this is where we're gonna support you, Michael, so that you can support your staff on the admin side. And if that's your will to have this in the fall, I would want to know that. If you're saying build toward this so you're affecting the change in the second semester because of the balance of the success, then we'll build towards that. If it's next fall, then we'll build towards that. I'm just wanting to gauge, and we had the dialogue a couple weeks ago, as several of you mentioned. And again, there wasn't a formal directive to me to do anything different, but I heard it. I brought it forward. We talked. I brought it, saying, this is what I heard. There was no formal action, but this is what I'm hearing. And if that's where this board is at, we will align to that. But I think we have shared our perspectives enough that I just want those two things shared, if I may request that.
Yes, and I'm going to bifurcate that and say, first, we've got the policy, and then we have direction on that area to you.
And I would request a thumbs direction for that.
That would be
Because we're
fine
not voting
after-
on a new
because I
agenda
do
item.
wanna
Is
get-
that appropriate? I just want to make sure.
Can we get through the policy
Sorry.
first and then give you the
Yeah,
direction?
yeah.
And I also want to clarify that if something like the K through 8 is fairly well-developed, if something, no matter what we give you direction, it's not going to come out of a hat right now. So I want to make sure we're clear on expectations on that. And it's possible that if we vote on the policy, we give you the thumbs up on the other direction to get through this topic tonight, that we do set aside potentially something else with direction from the whole board
Understand.
at another session.
That's fair. Thank you,
Okay.
Chair.
So the first thing I want to do right here is ask about the policy. Are we ready to vote on the policy alone? Okay. So did I take a motion in a second already?
Not yet.
Okay, I need a motion in a second? I already did, so, okay, that's what I thought. Oh, well, we've all slept since then. Okay, so all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
Nay.
Okay, that passes 6-1. A nay? Okay, 5-2. I apologize for that, I didn't hear you. So the policy as it stands will go forward for 525.1 as it is in the board packet. Now let's go on to the second topic. We do not have this on the agenda, so that we're not going to vote on it. We're only going to give verbal direction and also confirmation via thumbs up to Dr. Thomas on what we want the next steps to be, and direct him to then direct his administration. So let's lay the question on the table. Are we, that's a good question, it's a very broad question. Is the direction we want to do is give Dr. Thomas the board direction to work with the high school, and we're okay with E through 8? Or do you want the whole procedure to be consistent? So that's one or the other. We're not merging those.
I think we're all in agreement from this, well, I don't want to assume for the board, but the E8 moving forward, bell to bell, procedurally. Thumbs.
Thumbs, yes.
Agree.
Thumbs, okay.
Yep.
It's the high school.
And
And,
that's-
and my ask for that, which would maybe not be in alignment with everyone, I'm not sure, is that we push there to the extent you're comfortable and feel that we can do it with, do it successfully. Maybe it's January. Maybe that's a terrible idea. Maybe teachers will be asking for it. Maybe we'll work with staff, that we push to get there, knowing that the Surgeon General has been very loud and clear on this since the spring. So it should be of no surprise to anyone that this is a topic.
Okay, I just want to summarize this to make sure we're on the same page and make sure I'm repeating it correctly for the board notes. E through 8, the procedure that's been verbally described to us is fine, we're leaving that alone. We did a thumbs up on that. The only thing that we're going to do then is talk about the high school, and we're going to give Dr. Thomas direction to work with the high school to develop that procedure.
And I guess my question to the board is, do you want that to be in effect day one? Or is that something that we would have latitude to work, as staff return, to work through and develop and secure some buy-in, and it's at some point this school year? So I guess, do you want it day one or not? I guess that's the question.
I would say, I feel strongly it needs to be day one to be consistent, and like we've heard all the problems, whatever. Again, this is no surprise. The surprise to me was when I saw it in the Minneapolis principals guidelines. That's where I was like, wow, they're taking a firm stance on that. So my stance is, I'd like to see it done day one, bell to bell, K through 12. But I'm one board member, so.
I'm going to go ahead and say that I don't think that we can do that, given the state that we're in right now, and bell to bell, but I would like to suggest that we at least see if a procedure to unilaterally take cell phones out of the classroom unless it's a programming or whatever nuances they need to do. And that would be the first step, because I personally would like to see the burden taken off of the individual teachers. At least if we could start anything day one, that would be the consistency.
Going down the,
Any,
How are we
yeah,
doing this?
Enrique, I'm sorry, Director Velasquez?
I know, I'm a huge fan of prevention through environmental design, and I already know that certain carriers don't have service in the high school. So that kind of solves a problem all by itself. We already heard from Dr. Bezek that he doesn't see that there's a problem. For me, if the procedure says there's no procedure, I'm fine with that too.
I'm
not
not, could you
clear on that.
summarize, could you make that a little more succinct for the rest of us?
Sure. If the procedure is we don't make a change at the high school, I would be fine with that as well.
So are you directing Dr. Thomas to make that decision, or work with the administration to make that decision? Or are you saying that's what you want on day one?
If that's the outcome from Dr. Thomas working with administration, I would be comfortable.
Okay, so work with the administration on day one. Okay. Director Olstad, I'm just going to follow up this way.
Come back to me, please,
Okay.
if that's okay.
Director Crosby?
I think working with administration to work towards moving towards the K-8. I mean, I've shared that. The K-8 strategy is what I would hope for the high school, and what I'd hope, but again, the policy, we're giving administration the latitude, specifically Dr. Thomas, to work and decide and probably come back to the board with what the next steps might look like, given buy-in from administration. I think the buy-in from teachers is super important, and staff that are working the building. So I don't want to minimize that. I just would like to see us push to get there, knowing it's what's right. So
Can I get a little more succinct that no day one, you would prefer the
I
other one
have
of giving
flex.
them the direction?
yeah,
Okay.
I mean, there was a lot of pushback in this room tonight with some good examples, and that kind of pauses me a bit. And I'll just leave it at that.
Okay.
Yeah, I would agree. I don't need to have it day one. I think that I'd like to see it on the horizon, and I want administration to work with teachers and staff to see that it can actually be implemented.
Okay. Director Bullion?
I think for me, it would be day one, support for the bell to bell per class hour. When listening, I mean, the student, getting into the building, I've been at the high school many times. I have a high schooler, like, I know they use their phone to check in and check out, all that. But my direction, if I didn't make that clear, because I kept talking, was bell to bell every hour, that the teachers have the support, that we don't have cell phones in the classroom.
Director Olstad, are you ready?
I don't need procedures day one for the high school.
So if what I hear is correct, then democratically, we don't need procedures day one in the classroom because it was a 4 to 3, and that we're going to direct you to work with the administration at the high school to develop those procedures.
Well, I will, thank you, Chair, thank you, Board Directors. This is a really important conversation, and I appreciate your flexibility on the agenda to kind of have this informal kind of guidance and kind of what's really important. I will plan to bring this conversation back to the board August 26th as just a status update per conversations moving forward from tonight. So thank you.
Thank you.
The 26th, is that the next one? Did I say that right?
Yes.
Okay.
Let me, I'm pretty sure it is. Yes, it is. Okay. So we are done with the business portion of the meeting, and we're moving on to administrative reports. So the first is the superintendent report. Dr. Thomas?
Just real briefly, want to thank our community for the engagement on the Night to Unite. It was a great opportunity to make some strong connections with our community. And there was one community in particular, we came across a retired teacher who still subs at one of our schools. Dr. Edwards and I think might have found a couple of MinCAPS Pathways future instructors as well. So it just speaks volumes that we've got so much skill and support in our community for our students in our schools. And I just want to say thank you to the team that went out that night, as well as our community for supporting our schools. And I know we've got a few other administrative reports, but that's my report.
Administrative reports?
Thank you, Chair Franz. I will start with the business office. I would just like to kind of caution the board and members of our community as we move into this whole levy process, the referendum, the budgets. As we move forward, I would just caution that there's a lot of information being put out on social media, and I would just ask you to make sure that you know the source of the information that's out there. And I can give you an example. I've seen a chart that shows the percent of budget that is spent on administration, and it shows in the chart that it's at 46%. The chart actually comes from our dashboard. It very clearly is a dashboard chart, and you have to filter the charts when you pull up the information. So if you just pull up the entire Fund 1, General Fund, everything in there, it does not reflect 46% being administrative cost. It actually shows 22%. So the way that we've tried to get to that number that is shown on that chart, and the only way we could get to even close was to filter the data requested to only include sites and buildings. And if you know how the budget works, sites and buildings includes transportation, capital equipment, the long-term facilities maintenance, which by nature is going to be district and not buildings. So I would just caution you when you see charts out there to make sure you know the source of the data and what is being filtered when they show that. There's also some information out there about our audit. And let me just say that our auditors are still here. They will be here tomorrow. They'll be here Wednesday. They're still completing our audit. There are many things that we haven't done yet. We do year-end audit entries all the time. It's not complete until we get all of those things done. Just today, we had a conversation with Hildy, who is our actuarial, who worked with us to get the implicit and explicit amounts that we have to book. We are still verifying some of the state payments, state aid payments, and the property tax, because as you may or may not know, a school district operates on a modified accrual basis, which means that we recognize revenue as it's earned, whereas the state operates on a cash basis, which means they recognize revenue as it's paid out. So because you have to align those two, we have to make sure that we have all of our year-end accruals done. So we're still doing a tax receivables and a state aids receivable. We are still, one of the things that in the whole process of doing an audit, we sit down with the auditors. There's a very comprehensive analytical report that we look at that lists every budget item and the variances in that budget to actual. And we have to sit with the auditors and explain every variance that's in there over a certain amount. We haven't done that yet. So there's like I said, there's information out on social media about our audit. We have certainly not hidden anything about our audit. It's on the August 26th agenda. When we have things to share with you, we absolutely will share with you. But we are still in the middle of the audit, so we're not prepared to present any information to the board or the public about what our audit is actually looking like yet, because it's not done. The last thing that I just want to mention is the biggest percentage of revenue that we get in this district is from the general education formula allowance. And that's set in statute. It tells you how much you get per pupil. It's the biggest discretionary pot of money that we have. Everything else that we receive is categorical or has very strict strings attached to how we're allowed to spend the dollars. So there's been a lot of, again, information about CPI or inflation rates. And if you look at the formula for the past 15 years, you'll see, and you can look this up on the Department of Education website, the formula allowance has increased about 2% every year, with the exception of last year when it went to 4.5%. So when we say that the formula is not keeping up with inflation, that's what we're talking about. The formula allowance has been consistently 2% every year in statute. So it's not really, it's kind of disingenuous to say that our revenues and expenses are not matching inflation because it's not comparing apples to apples. So I guess my cautionary tale is any information that's out there, we are more than happy to sit down with whoever wants to see the information. We're providing it to the board. We've committed to being transparent, and we will continue to do that. So just be cautious when you see information out there and understand the source of the information and how it is being used. Thank you. Director Herman is unfortunately lost her voice, so I'm going to present her administrative report on her behalf today. In response to a report of information from the previous board meeting regarding the number of administrator hires last school year, I would like to provide the following update. Firstly, I want to express my gratitude for the opportunity to review the reference document. It was invaluable in helping us understand the context of the inquiry and allowed us to provide a clearer explanation. Regarding the statement on administrative hires, as mentioned several times in the board meeting, the crux of the matter lies in differing definitions of administration. The document's creator appears to categorize roles such as ECFE assistant, early childhood screener, cultural liaison, kids co-assistant, noon supervisor, deans, and other roles under admin. However, HR, MDE, and other governmental reports do not classify these positions as admin roles. Additionally, positions like speech-language pathologist, occupational therapist, school counselor, and social worker are listed under SS on the report, which I assume refers to student support, though these roles are actually classified under the teacher's contract. Clarifying the definition of new FTEs is also essential. For instance, the Assistant Director of Early Learning was mentioned as a new FTE. In reality, this position results from a reduction in administrative FTEs by combining the 1.0 Early Learning Coordinator and a 0.8 Assistant Director of Support Services into a single 1.0 FTE role. We also need a shared understanding of the timeline for these changes. For example, the adjustment related to the Assistant Director of Early Learning was not implemented until July 1st, 2024, which falls within the current school year, not the previous one. According to our HR posting data, we added 2 administrative positions during the 23-24 school year. The reinstatement of the Assistant Director of Human Resources, which was reviewed and approved by the school board during the 23-24 budget discussions, with final approval on June 12, 2023. The Early Learning Assistant Coordinator position, funded by Fund for Community Ed, was charged. This change was part of a comprehensive restructuring based on an external consultant's review, which was also reviewed and approved by the school board on March 13th, 2023. Provide a brief overview of our internal control process. When hiring managers submit a request to post a position, HR reviews whether the FTE is available due to a resignation, retirement, leave, or reassignment. If no FTE is open, HR checks for board approval of additional staffing, either through the budget process or additional staffing memos. HR does not post a vacancy unless the FTE is open in the system or approved by the board. When presenting additional FTE requests to the board, the rationale and supporting data are mentioned in the memo or discussed during budget meetings. Lastly, as discussed in previous board meetings, our current version of Skyward lacks a position control feature that allows for clean cyclical reports. However, we are optimistic that the upgraded version of Skyward we plan to implement in October will include advanced features that will enable us to generate accurate cyclical reports comparing approved and filled FTEs. We recognize the value of this information and are committed to exploring the new features to find a solution that meets this desired reporting capability. Thank you for your time.
That is a chair from the admin.
Thank you very much, Director Frederickson via Director Herman and vice versa. So on board reports, does anyone have a board report?
Are we gonna go down?
We can. I don't know how many because we're coming off a summer
I
break.
just have, I have a little one.
Okay, go for it.
I echo the community events have been great. Policy committee started up, and I just really appreciate the input from the community, the collaboration at our policy committee. I always leave there so appreciative of that committee. And then I mentioned earlier being at the MSBA conference. The conference was titled Governing for Improved Success. And I took pages and pages and pages of notes. It was so good, it'll take me a long time to process it all. But one thing that I feel like I just want to share tonight is a question that was posed, and I'm just going to read straight from my notes. The question was asked of the board members that were in attendance or the leadership that was in attendance. Are we modeling the behavior in the boardroom that we expect in the classroom? When teachers are concentrating or distracted by the boardroom, their effectiveness decreases. And that was I heard that loud at the conference. I heard that, it stuck with me. And so I'm just gonna leave that there. I'm just gonna leave that as a kind of an open-ended question for us all to ponder, because I know that I've been pondering that for myself, wanting to make sure that I'm behaving in a way that we expect of our students. So I just throw that out there for the rest of us. Really appreciate MSBA for their leadership. It was an incredible conference. So that's my report.
Does anybody else have a board report?
I just wanted to invite everybody to the Youth Arts and Craft Market on Wednesday.
Yes.
I'm modeling my prior purchases today. I love that market. We have such talented kiddos. So it's at Hidden Oaks from 4 to 6 on Wednesday. So
Thank you very much for that reminder. That is a wonderful event. With no other board reports,
One quick
oh,
one.
you do?
Yeah,
Okay,
I
good.
do. So Southwest Metro, our superintendent retired at the end of the school year, and we were able to turn around really quickly, and we're able to hire a very talented, dynamic new superintendent, Dr. Jeff Horton, who joins us from, what school was that? GFW. Don't ask me what those were, but GFW.
Fairfax, Winthrop.
there we go.
Small town.
Yeah. outstanding administrator with great credentials, great energy, exactly what we're looking for in Southwest Metro, and he'll be a fantastic partner.
I know Darren Kermes will be missed, but I'm glad that they were able to find someone like that so soon. So thank you very much. Anybody else? Okay. Of course, we've got the Finance Committee coming up on August 15th. We have an Executive Committee coming up on August 19th. And I believe, as we stated earlier, the Teaching and Learning Committee on October 9th. And for future events, again, as we stated earlier, the last day to file an affidavit for candidacy for the school board is tomorrow, August 13th at 5 p.m. New teacher in service starts August 19th and goes through the 21st, and that will be here at the DSC. The back-to-school event that we've all been passing around our little flyers for is August 22nd. We'll be in the Prior Lake High School parking lot from 4 to 7 p.m., and it's supposed to be a wonderful event and a lot of fun. Not sure if adults can get in the bouncy house, but it would be kind of fun to have that adult session. Our next school board study session is August 26th at 6 p.m. here at the DSC. The next district building in service staff days will be August 26th to the 29th. And what we're all waiting for is the start of the 24-25 school year. Grades 6 through 9 start September 3rd, grades 7 through 12, September 4th, and grades K through 5, September 5th. And that's all I had for future events.
Chair France, what's the topic of the executive committee meeting on August 19th?
I'm Director Herman.
Grievance level 3 for the administrative assistants.
Grievance level 3 for the administrative assistants? Thank you.
All right, with no other comments, I'm going to ask for a motion to adjourn.
So made.
In a second. Okay, by Director Velazquez and Director Burnick. And all in favor? Aye. Opposed? No. Okay, that passes 7-0. We are adjourned.
You don't need a motion in a second.